many people does it take? Okay, sweet. So today we're chatting about financial ethics. So let's kind of dive in at a high level. We're going to, last class we chatted about the tech ethics side of things. In the next class we're going to be chatting about institutional ethics, seeing these protocols as institutions. But right now, thinking about the financial and money aspects of cryptocurrency. So first, understanding cryptocurrencies as this experimental representation of value and thinking about the history of money over time and where cryptocurrency fits in. Then looking at some of the societal impacts by first looking at just like how money drives behavior with cryptocurrencies. This is kind of just a general thing of just money incentivizing people to do things. So we'll talk about climate change as an example of that, with just like, hey, you can make money by turning electricity into Bitcoin, and then a lot of people do it. And then this third piece is understanding what I would call the traditional financial public policy goals. So these are things like, especially around cryptocurrencies, and today we'll focus on this one, financial stability. So there's the traditional financial industry and financial regulation, and they focus on a couple things that are not, that are very specific to like the health of financial markets, so we'll kind of look at that as well around cryptocurrency. So to start, and let me say one other piece here, which is, so in the readings, so there's a lot of delicious, juicy material here, and in the readings, there was some stuff about wealth inequality. We're mostly going to look at that during class number 7, where we talk about this, how wealth inequality works within these systems, especially how it's connected to funding public goods in the cryptocurrency world. On this, the pieces on fairness and like securities law, we're mostly going to talk about that in class number 10 that has securities law. And then the kind of Libra and kind of more general unbanked stories, we're going to chat about that in class 11. So we're not going to be diving in too deep on those today, but are going to be chatting about some of the pieces around climate change and programmable money and responsible disclosure. Cool. So yeah, let's talk about this first piece. Cryptocurrencies as experimental representation of value and how experimentations have happened over time with money. So money has evolved over time, which is crazy though. I mean, honestly, before learning about cryptocurrencies, I didn't even think about this and just assumed that US dollars and or another nation state currency was the main one. But in fact, it has evolved over time. Way back in the day, you have barter, which, by the way, anthropologists, there's a debate over how much barter was actually part of really old societies. But in theory, you can imagine people trading one thing for another. Eventually, that turned into like physical tokens. So this was people using shells. You could call this also commodity money, where the thing in and of itself is valuable. So that could be gold or shells or things like that people would trade. And then eventually those turned into paper money, which was just easier to carry around than things like actual lumps of gold or shells or what have you. And then you have electronic money, and this is a picture of like the telegraph back in the 1800s, and then cryptocurrencies today. So money, it's a weird concept, but yeah, money actually has evolved over time and has kind of filled different use cases over time as well. So what does money actually do? And again, I want to stress that it's just weird for us to think about this because money is such a core primitive of society, and so understanding money is kind of difficult. But the way that most people think about it is as these big three roles in society. One is as a store of value, which means it maintains its value over time. So this is something like, if you have an ounce of gold, way back in the day, in Roman times, you could buy a toga. And if you have an ounce of gold today, you could buy a suit or a dress or whatever. So the store of value is this idea that you have something and it will continue its value throughout time. In addition, you have what people call the medium of exchange. So it says, can be used to intermediate the exchange of goods and services, a common ground for determining value. So this is the idea that you have, this is often when we give and receive money from folks, that's people thinking about the medium of exchange, using money as a way, as this kind of intermediary thing to exchange goods and services. People often talk about this solves the coincidence of wants problem, which is this idea that if I want If I want Natalia's computer and she wants my backpack, but then we can just trade them. But if I want her computer and she wants my house, and then we don't want the same things from each other. And so having something that's a shared kind of middle ground can help solve that issue. Then you have this unit of account piece, and this is, as they say, a standard numerical unit of measurement of market value for goods and services and other transactions. It's just a way to compare things. So this is when you have there's like two different houses. You can tell which one is worth more money. And this is just, again, a very helpful way to say, okay, I have something. What is its value in comparison to other things in the world? So these are kind of the three main things that money, the uses that money has. It can store your value over time. You can use it to exchange with other people, and then you can use it as a way to denote it in comparison to other things as a unit of account. And money often there's a bunch of properties that it usually has that make it so that it can do those things. Things like, you'll hear people talk about fungibility a lot. That is this idea that each unit can be exchanged with one another. So if I have a $20 bill and there's a different $20 bill over here, they are fungible with each other. They are the same thing, versus something like a piece of art or whatever, or like a baseball card or something that might not be fungible. Like if I have a Hank Aaron baseball card and you have a Babe Ruth baseball card, they're not the same. The other one that's crucial here is this limited in supply piece, where it's you have to, there can't be infinite of the thing, because if you have infinite of the thing, then everybody can just access it as much as they want, so you actually have to have some smallish amount of it. And there are other parts of money that make it so that it can do those uses that we talked about. So thinking about why Bitcoin, that's money having value in general, and the uses that money can have, and why does Bitcoin though have value? And let's ask this to the people. So do people have an idea of why does Bitcoin have value? Yeah.
Because we believe it has value.
Yeah. Tell me more about what you mean by we believe it has value.
If enough people agree on this thing having value, then it can serve the three purposes you just spoke of. But it's about people collectively agreeing that it has that value, and otherwise it's worthless. If we just lost our faith in the U.S. dollar today, then the dollars we hold would be invaluable because no one would take them.
Yeah, cool. I like that. This story itself is telling you.
And sort of as it continues to be traded, the value stays. So it's not a certain group of people thinks it has X amount of value. As you've seen Bitcoin being injected into the system and have more people have access to it, it still holds. So that, yeah.
Is your point there that can you restate your point?
Well, I was just saying, sometimes in the cryptocurrency world, we have certain pockets of people that believe more in certain types of cryptocurrency in terms of what type of value it has. So, especially when you think about ICOs, some people can argue okay, there's actually no value there at all, and a lot of other people are wait, but I believe in it. It's sort of so I think with Bitcoin, what I think is different is that no matter how many hands it transfers and no matter which group it's sitting with, it kind of still holds the same value. It's not people don't really argue over it as much as we might see maybe other forms of cryptocurrency.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think that, and I agree with you generally that there's some, Bitcoin's been around for a long time, since 2009, and so people, there were definitely those debates at the beginning,
right.
And then now there are more people convinced that it should be worth something, and more people that have it, and then obviously with something like something like Ethereum or the ICOs that are built on top of Ethereum, there's more people debating do these things actually have value or not? Though I think that the underlying kind of idea is mostly the same with both of them, which is, is there a group of people that believe that this thing has value, and are they using it for some of those use cases? Let's go to, Sabina.
Also, there's no infinite supply of the coin.
Yeah, how many Bitcoins are there?
Right now, I don't know.
How many will there be?
21 million?
21 million. That's a really crazy thing, by the way, because the internet, the internet allows you to take any amount of bytes and duplicate it infinity times and send it anywhere around the world to infinity places, all for free. which is crazy, which is really crazy. And so the fact that you said, okay, we have this thing that has a scarce amount, like the internet was kind of defined by information abundance, and Bitcoin is defined by its scarcity. Yeah, and if there were infinite Bitcoins, if anybody could create them out of thin air, then they would be worth nothing. Yeah.
Another reason given in support of Bitcoin having value is that it's created by work. You have to spend some electricity or some work to generate it, unlike dollar that can be created out of thin air.
Yeah, so your perspective here is because people have to do work in order to get the currency, that makes it so that it kind of has, I guess some kind of, I don't know. I understand what you're saying, which is there's that versus the U.S. government, which is like the U.S. government really does, and we're not going to do this today, but you can look at graphs of how much money the U.S. government prints or other governments, and they print. Obviously, it's a group of people that get together and they choose how much they print. And so I think that there is definitely a difference there. This one is very, what we would call the monetary policy of Bitcoin is very clear. You know that there's only going to be 21 million over time, and you know how to work to get it, versus the something like the Federal Reserve in the U.S. government, which prints money, which is maybe less clear. Let's go. Let's do 3 more. So yeah.
Sort of going off that, like there's a lot of infrastructure that's already in place behind Bitcoin to sort of perpetuate the mining of Bitcoin and the verification of transactions. So that sort of adds value to Bitcoin, at least in my view. And there's a lot of money already spent that's not going to go away anytime soon. So that sort of backs it up.
Yeah, and you're saying and I guess part of that is that those people have that skin in the game, that they are like, I already put all this money into this mining equipment. This thing sure as hell better have value. And then, and there's also all that infrastructure, kind of like you can imagine something like with U.S. dollars. The U.S. government has a bunch of infrastructure in place such that they can tax people, such that they can make, and they have institutions like the Federal Reserve and like, central banks, and then all the connections with the commercial banks, and all of that is a lot of strong foundation that both people want to make sure that the U.S. dollar has value, and those mechanisms allow it to kind of keep its monetary policy and other things like that. That's good. Aaron?
Well, current economic thought says that it's about price discovery of the interaction between supply and demand. That's what defines value. And the old 19th century Marxist way of thinking was that value is inherent in the labor that is required to produce it. So it's a very old debate.
I agree with that. That we're kind of, lots of the folks in this world are more of the current libertarian / just market view of the supply and demand versus the labor theory of value, which I honestly don't know that much about.
Yeah, so given that got brought up, it seems useful to differentiate both between monetary value and other possible definitions of value, right? Which is like, does it produce some sort of good in the world, or is it useful to people, or other things like that, versus a monetary definition is very simply, is there an ability to exchange this for money at some price, and that is definitive of the monetary value. Also between descriptive and prescriptive notions of value, of like, what is the value that this is at, and why does it have the current value, versus should this be valuable? Right, like that we've had, it should be valuable because it requires important resources poured into it, or it should only be valuable if it has labor poured into it, or there's notions of it should only be valuable if it is tied to what, gold trees and something else. I'm forgetting.
Yeah, I think in both of those things that you noted, one is that that the notions of value are very difficult sometimes. It's like things that are, something like air is super valuable. Like breathable air is valuable because it's not very scarce. It's like hard to measure it and it's hard to do that. And then this descriptive versus prescriptive notion of saying, hey, why does money, looking past, why do things have value versus looking in the future, should things have value? Neha, were you going to say one other piece, by the way?
I think a lot of people got out of it. I think it was very interesting that people were saying that it has value because people think it has value. It has value. It's almost like circular, right? And so an interesting question to me is, how does something get there? How do you rise to people believing it have value? Because in the beginning, Bitcoin certainly didn't have any value, really.
Yeah, I feel like that's where this investment comes in. Like maybe people even more believe in its value after so many people have invested something like the dollar that has a value in another sphere in like all this mining equipment. Well, the miners, the people that invested all this mining equipment are clearly going to believe in its value for as long as their investment pays off, which lets me believe that I should believe in the value more. But I also want to use that to like push back against your point that like there's value because there was work in creating it. Like there was also work in creating the original Bitcoins, but at that point they were like 10 cents. And it's only because people started seeing this imaginary value in them that the price rose.
More
Yeah.
work though.
Yeah, I agree. Your point is the very basic point why it has value. I just said on top of that, some people think that that's also a reason why it's more genuine and it should have value.
Yes, I agree with you. I just want to point that.
And I think that's an interesting point. Like, hey, back in the day, even though a bunch of computers were doing work on it, it wasn't worth anything. So, yeah, let's do one more thought and then let's wrap.
And yes, if you want to try to detangle the circularity of people think it has value, there's two different sides, which is one, do people want a thing for whatever it is? Food or television or something else that I want to purchase versus is it an investment? In which case, if it's an investment, it is some notion of a prediction of how much I can sell a thing for in the future, in a kind of, I guess, in a time period and quantity that I would want to exchange for some other money that I can use for utility in that future. And so like this value of I believe other people do is in some senses these competing predictions about what other people are going to predict about this thing. Right, and also like once you invest in it, it generates incentive scheme. Like it generates incentives to manipulate the value of this. So it also has this weird social structure going on from that standpoint.
Yeah, I think it's funny, and people talk about a Keynesian beauty contest, which I think is this idea where you think about what other people think are going to value the thing at, and then that's part of the speculation game of how people do it. So in any case, it has value for a wide variety of reasons, which all of us said. But a reminder here that Bitcoin is not, and when I say Bitcoin here, it's like Bitcoin is the example, but obviously other cryptocurrencies have value in a variety of ways. Bitcoin is not just money, and other cryptocurrencies are not just money. So you can think about them as a category of crypto assets. That's what people call this general category. And so you can either think of them as money, like currency, a security, which we're going to talk about in a bit what that means, or a commodity, which again we're going to talk about what that means. And each of them has a different, it's honestly very helpful for me to think about the different regulatory bodies that regulate them. And then a note here, by the way, is that unlike with the tech ethics stuff that we were talking about last week, that kind of tech ethics kind of emerged, and then people were like, oh, what should we do with this? And then they started to create these new like communications acts and things like that for this new tech world. But in general, I would say the tech world is less regulated than the financial world. The financial world, once you punch money into things, and this money stuff has been around for a long time, you have a lot of regulation. So we're going to look at each of these different groups that categorize, that think of crypto assets as either money or security or commodity. So if you think of it as money, as we said, it kind of holds these properties, store value, medium exchange, unit of account, or maybe just one of those properties. And this thing called the FinCEN, the financial, do you know what the FinCEN
Fin
is?
is just finance.
Oh,
And then, I should know it, C and then it's.
Enforcement Network, Crimes Enforcement Network, that's what it is, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network.
I can say criminal.
The real goal, and these are like the three big goals of general financial regulation, even pre-cryptocurrencies, is just like guarding against illicit activities. Is this money being used for bad things? This is a lot of what we talked about last week around like giving money to WikiLeaks or like being able to buy drugs off of Silk Road or whatever. And people talk about here there's these money transmitter laws, which are like if I'm a person who will have your money for a bit and like give it on to someone else, how should I be regulated? These people also talk about KYC, which is Know Your Customer, or AML, which is anti-money laundering. And this is the idea that this KYC idea is like you need to if you someone like Coinbase or like very likely Bitstamp, when you go onto Bitstamp's website and you say, hey, I would like to buy cryptocurrency, they need to get my driver's license or some kind of ID or something like that to make sure that they know who I am, so that I can't just go on there anonymously and just like use these bitcoins for illicit activities. So that is people that view cryptocurrency as money. And then you could also view cryptocurrency as a security. And a security is, there's this thing called the Howey test, which people use to think about securities. I think about, so yeah, it's like, it's an investment of money. So you give somebody money in a common enterprise, it's like unit over here, that then you expect to get profits from eventually, and who makes the profits happen? Not me, like someone over there from the efforts of a promoter or a third party. So this is like a classic thing where it's like, I want to make money, I give it to somebody and hope that, I give my money to somebody and hope that they will give me more money in the future after profits have happened. And so, ooh, that's not right. This is supposed to be SEC. Let me write that. So this is, so the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the security is the key part there. And again, this is annoying that security here is the same as like security of these networks, but it's the same word. And so you think the main public good that they're trying to have here is investor and consumer protection. So this is the idea that consumers, when people say like snake oil salesman, that's what people are worrying about, which is me going to you and telling you, hey, I got this great new token, I use all these cool new computer science and economics things, I'm from MIT, so I know what I'm doing, and you should buy it. And there are a bunch of rules around that say, hey, I can't just do that for everybody in the world, I need to like only talk to accredited investors, people that have like make more than like $250,000 a year, like have more than $2.5 million in assets. I don't remember exactly those numbers. So that's people that view cryptocurrency as a security. You could also view cryptocurrency as a commodity. And commodities are these things that are used as inputs in the production of other goods or services. So something like gold is a commodity. They're very fungible with each other. Like the one bar of gold is equal to another bar of gold. A bunch of like food is thought of, like corn and grain is thought of as a commodity. And stuff like oil, things that turn into energy, are also thought of as commodities. And so you can view these cryptocurrencies as a commodity in the sense that, so with Ethereum, you have, you need to pay to run smart contracts with gas. And what that means is if I code up a smart contract that says, if the price of oil goes above this amount or whatever, then send Neha a bunch of money or whatever. If I code that up, when that runs on the Ethereum network, I need to essentially pay for each line of code that I run. And the reason why they did this is because they didn't want people just be writing tons and tons of code, just getting it for free, or doing infinite loops. They needed a way to like stop those infinite loops. And so you can view, in gas, the thing that you actually pay, gas is just ETH. It's just the same thing as Ethereum, as Ether. And so you pay this little bit of Ether in order to run the computations. And in that sense, it's very similar to a commodity. That's like, hey, I have this thing, it's just used as an input. When I want to run code on this global weird distributed computer, I use this commodity called gas or ETH to do so. So and that's why they call it gas, because it's a commodity-like thing. So you could view cryptocurrency as a commodity. And a note here, and a reason why it's the CFTC stands for Commodities and Futures Trading Commission, that the commodities is the first word, futures is the second word. The reason why commodities and futures are connected is because, so a futures contract is this idea that if you have a bunch of corn, it's an issue where if I have a bunch of corn and I want to make sure that like I can make money from that corn in the future, what happens if in the future the price is super low? And it's like, ooh, that's bad. Or if I'm a buyer of corn, I'm like, oh, I want to buy some corn in the future, but what happens if it's super high in the future? That might be bad. So what people do is they instead make these futures contracts where they say, hey, I'm going to buy a certain amount of corn in the future. And it's a win for all parties because it essentially is a risk management system. So that as the price goes way up, the price goes way down, then the people don't lose out as much. And so, yeah.
So in futures contract in general, do they actually end up buying or selling, or there is no obligation to buy or sell later?
I believe that is an obligation. There's another kind of derivative called an option, where they have an option to buy or sell. But with this one, they are required to.
There's absolutely an obligation, and you can corner the market. This is where the first cases of cornering the market came into being, where you would buy a future, buy or sell, but you would be required to deliver corn of a certain quality on a particular date, and lots of people bought up that corn of that quality just at that time, or stealthily over time, and then you were required to buy from them at very, very high prices. So it's very, very much about cornering the market and obligations. It's really tough.
So
business.
on that given date, they have to sell at that price that they agreed several months ago.
Yes.
They have to deliver the product.
Yeah.
Typically, how long are these contracts? Like 1 year, 6 months?
I think that I have no idea. And they could go from one day, probably even 12 hours from now, all the way to, up many years, depending on what commodity you're talking about. So this is
There's no restriction.
Yeah.
You can do anything you want.
free. So that's why commodities and futures are connected, is because commodities are often connected to futures for like a risk management kind of thing. And futures are this part of this thing called a derivative. And a derivative is just this idea that you have some kind of financial thing, and a derivative is essentially kind of a wrapper that references that thing. So that's kind of abstract, but you can imagine the futures contract where you say, okay, I have some kind of underlying thing, which is this corn or whatever, and I will just make a contract that says, oh, I will buy this corn in the future. Something like an option, as we said earlier, is this thing that says, oh, this is a contract that says I may buy, I have the option to buy this thing in the future. Or this thing called like a swap, which is like a way to do either of these things through time. And the key idea here is that derivatives are, that futures are a kind of derivative, and that derivatives are a financial instrument that essentially references some underlying asset. As a way to say, okay, I'm going to make a contract that's based on buying or selling this asset in the future. And it's this trade-off between risk and predictability that people are dealing with. So this whole idea is, so this idea is cryptocurrency as a commodity and or a derivative or futures is regulated by the CFTC, the Commodities and Futures Trading Commission. And really, in their public policy goal is ensuring financial stability for all intents and purposes. When you start to get all these derivatives and these things that reference other financial instruments and derivatives that reference derivatives and stuff, it can get kind of sketchy. And so they're worried about financial stability. So those are those three groups. And as a note, just comparing cryptocurrency to the size of some of those other groups, you have, so each of these little boxes represents like $1 billion worth, essentially. So you have cryptocurrency, this is like Bitcoin and then Ethereum and then other, it's pretty much $200 billion worth of cryptocurrency. So it's like, it seems like a lot of money, but compared to some of these other asset classes, it's not actually that big. So one of the biggest commodities, gold, has an $8 trillion market cap. So it's about 40x the amount of cryptocurrency that exists in the world. You can also see here, there's about, again, another kind of, essentially another 10x above that are stocks. So these are all, and stocks are they're an equity, they're a security, a thing that you buy and hope it goes up in value. There's about 70 trillion of those. There's about $70 trillion worth of just like money in the world. And then there's about $700 trillion worth of these derivatives. So there are a lot of derivatives in the world. Because people like messing with financial instruments. So I like to think of this as just like cryptocurrency, and then like 10x essentially cryptocurrency is gold, and then like 100x cryptocurrency are like stocks and money, and then 1000x is derivatives. So that's how crypto relates to the macro ecosystem, and a reminder that these different pieces of these different kind of uses of the technology connect to these 5 camps that we talked about at the beginning and that we read about, where it's like this sound money piece is all about the store of value side of things. while the internet payments piece is all about the medium of exchange side. And then stuff like Web3 and open finance is much more connected. Web3 is closer to the commodity piece to some extent. And these are both connected to this like financial derivatives and the ability to make programmable money. And all of it's also connected to this decentralized ledger technology space, which is, you can think of all of this stuff as a way to instigate existing banks and nation states and other players to kind of innovate more. And so that's kind of the way that I see this. One final note is that finance, so we talked about money and the different ways that money can be categorized and the different kinds of ways that you can think about cryptocurrency, whether it's a commodity, a security, or a currency. And all of those things are, of course, connected and embedded within all these institutions. So we don't really need to go too deep into all these, but there are these international, kind of supranational ones, like the IMF and the World Bank. Each nation state generally has its own central bank, which determines how many bitcoins to print or how many US dollars to print. And then the companies, obviously there's all these commercial banks that have lots of market caps and that have a lot of money. The credit card companies are really big, which I only realized recently. Insurance is connected to this, and then there's those regulatory bodies. So this is kind of, cryptocurrency is starting to touch each and all of these systems in a way, and is of course different from them. So let me pause for a second. Does anybody have any questions on these? Yeah.
Do you think like cryptocurrency will have to create its own sort of like institutions to be actually heavily and fully integrated, if that is like the next rev of the financial system? Or do you think they will be able to maintain sort of being separate and not having to replicate these sort of like structures just for the digital world?
That's a good question. So will cryptocurrency need to create some of these similar institutions, or can it just like exist as this weird new entity in and of itself? I think it's both a yes and situation where you will have, of course, there are things like companies that are in the cryptocurrency space, someone like Coinbase or Bitstamp or whatever, that exists pretty much like a normal company, and that they are just dealing with cryptocurrency most of the time. However, I don't think there's this weird new, and we'll talk about this next time, but these new protocols and these new crypto networks like Bitcoin and Ethereum and other things, most of them aren't connected to something like a company or, they're not run by an institution, international institution. They're kind of just these weird new open source projects. And I think likely that is the best kind of holding ground and governance body for them.
Would you say that the decentralization camp would find an institution antithetical to?
No, totally, which is why I was sort of saying like, I think the ethos of the crypto world is that they shouldn't have that, but I wonder to create like a full adoption and like recall like and have this be the only system that exists for any sort of like monetary value, like the US paper dollar would be, like we wouldn't have like individual country currencies. Like if you were to completely rehaul the system, like would this come up in any way, or could you stick to the ethos that it currently has today?
I think it's a good question. I just would want to add an additional thing to it, which is it's likely to be the case, back to this idea, which is that some of these, like the Uber, like Bitcoin as a protocol is not going to have a company that runs it. As far as I can tell, that will never happen.
Right.
However, this camp over here, the decentralized ledger technology camp, and a bunch of these new banks that are, someone like either Libra or these central banks that are exploring how to use cryptocurrencies,
Right.
They're going to be much more close to normal institution style things. So that's
Is
my
that
initial
the
take.
you were referencing that camp?
Yeah, or maybe like the crypto punks or.
Okay.
Anarchists that made Bitcoin valuable.
Yeah.
No, I wonder where you close it. Where are the boundaries of this course with the DLT there that you had, right? So there's an insurance company on the other side of the river that is doing a permission blockchain for a market in corporate bonds. But in order to give it more liquidity, they're selling tokens on this. So this is both a way, a DLT, not a money, way of organizing a market, but on top of that, then they're tokenizing, which is security of some kind, I guess. And so, is that a part of this course, this kind of stuff? Or is it only if you're using the blockchain to actually want to make money? Or, you know, is it just is it the cryptocurrency narrowly that is the concern of this class, or is it broader?
Yeah, good question. And we had this question, I think, on the first day of class as well, and there was some debate. I think that most of this class is focused on, is less focused on the cryptocurrency or blockchain's use in healthcare or blockchain's use in like insurance or things of that variety. I think most of this class is focused on, to some extent, these 4 ones and less so this one. Part of that is just like myself and Neha, I think we know we're not as much experts in that side of things, and to some extent we are, yeah, we're more knowledgeable about this side. However, I would say that all of it is, to me, all of it seems fair game and exciting from the mindset of experimentation with money systems and how we should do money and distributed databases and all that. So, yeah, does that answer your question?
It's the boundary is blurry, you're saying, and
Blurry.
we can choose to whether it's inside or outside.
Yeah, exactly. With, I would say, but there are things, and as we, for any, and this is back to what Neha and I know best, because we know, and especially like Neha knows a lot about like how Bitcoin works and how the protocol works and things like that, versus we know less about some of these some of the projects in the permission blockchain space and might be more skeptical or less knowledgeable about them. Yeah.
I might add one thing. I also think for the purposes of this class, asking questions about what are some unintended consequences of the technology and what kind of controls do we want to embed early on, those questions are way more pertinent and interesting on that side rather than the blockchain for healthcare, blockchain for music rights side, because that side is really, you know, it's distributed databases. It's distributed databases,
It's
and
not very different.
it's, at least, you know, obviously the space is still being developed and we all have different opinions on what might happen in the future. We're all making predictions, but in my opinion, I think it's, you know, the ethical questions there are less concerning than remaking money and distributing it to people broadly and you know, remaking value, rethinking what is value and how does software and technology influence value.
Cool. Let's do one more question.
Yeah, genuinely curious about this because we hear about like on-chain governance and decentralized autonomous organizations, and I'm not like deep in the Ethereum world. To what extent have you seen these playing the role of the institutions that you just went over? For example, like the Ethereum fork was a decision made by the community. Software people decided to keep on running.
Great question. So I think my initial answer is we'll talk a lot about this in next class around these things as institutions, and then especially a lot during the section 2 classes 6, 7, and 8, which are like seeing these blockchains, thinking about governance, how they govern themselves. And I think that in general, yeah, they're trying to, the goal of these things is to make decisions, and so these distributed autonomous organizations or these weird new open source communities are trying to make these decisions, and there's a lot of experimentation happening there that's different than, you know, the traditional, you know, firms or companies or things like that, and it is I'm personally intellectually interested in it. Does that answer your question? No.
I think I'm in agreement with you. I just wondered if you had like done any like mapping between what's been happening like on these blockchains and the institutions that we know in our centralized money world.
Yeah, I think that the mappings that I would say are, so sometimes what people do, and by the way, a decentralized autonomous organization is essentially a smart contract that takes as input votes, and then as output it makes decisions. So it says, hey, I'm going to do a vote for the next 24 hours. Everybody get your votes in, get your votes in. You all give some votes. I say, okay, we're going to buy this thing, or we're going to go in this direction, or whatever. That's what the decentralized autonomous organization does. And I think that the mappings that people are creating are sometimes there's just a lot of experimentation. Sometimes people put wrappers around, like there's this this weird project that's trying to create a normal company, an LLC, and is trying to have a distributed autonomous organization kind of control that LLC, so kind of connect the bits world with the atoms world. You have a lot of these things are trying to solve coordination problems, and so that's also happening in this world where you have people trying new mechanisms, whether it's these weird on-chain governance things to give people money for supporting new developments to the ecosystem, or other ways to fund some of these public goods. I think a lot of that maps onto especially the nonprofits or international institutions here. So I think we'll talk a lot more about it in the future, but it's juicy. Okay, so let's do this. Let me say one final thing, and then we'll take a quick break. So this what if side, the way to think about this, in my opinion, this is from this guy Matt Levine, who's just a writer with Bloomberg, and this is kind of the take-home message from this first section. In addition to understanding all the different sub-pieces for how these things work, here's the macro idea. He says, one reason I like writing about crypto is that it offers sort of a fantasy role-playing financial system. There are a bunch of smart people who are deeply familiar with the workings of the regular old financial system, stock offerings and margin lending and high-frequency trading and everything else, and they get really into the details, and they find it all interesting, but also a bit constraining. They live in a system that was constructed over time by other people, and they get to know the system intimately, but at night they go home and dream about building their own perfect system, free of all the arbitrary and conflicting choices made by others in the past. And then crypto hands them an absolutely blank piece of paper and asks them, like, what would a corporate financing transaction or a stock exchange or a money market fund or whatever look like if you were building it from scratch? And their answer might be a faithful homage that looks like the normal existing thing, or a rationalized and perfected version of the normal thing, or the normal thing with a few fun bells and whistles, or a sloppy broken version of the normal thing, or a wild flight of fancy that takes the lessons of the normal financial system in a totally unexpected direction. And all of this happens at once in parallel, and there are kind of no rules. It's just smart people reimagining what a financial system might be, and how could you not enjoy that? So this is a writer, just like a media writer, talking about what it's like for him, who's covered the financial world for a long time, now covering the crypto world. It's just like, you got a bunch of these like wide-eyed people that are like, ooh, I know how it usually works, and now I get to like experiment with how it works. So to some extent, what we've looked at last class, we used the same thing when we were thinking about tech ethics, where we say tech ethics is not understanding what Aristotle thought about, what should or should not be true, but rather understanding some kind of complex system, determining its positive and negative impacts, and then trying to intervene in that complex system to shape things more positively. And what we're dealing with today is kind of weird because money is, it's definitely in this kind of economics / market / incentives bucket, but it is, understanding its impacts are more complicated, especially when connected to cryptocurrency. And so what we're going to do, I think, so there's going to be two, the best way I think to think about it, and then eventually, so the best way to think about it is, in my opinion, as this two kind of levels of money. There is money as a system that just like incentives drive behavior. So this is not specific to cryptocurrency. This is just thinking about money as an incentive and how that drives people's behavior. And then there's kind of a second level where you're like, okay, if we do have this money thing, then how can we keep that money fair and resilient or whatever? And that second level piece is the one that most of the like traditional public policy folks and financial regulators, what they think about is making sure that the money is fair and resilient and things like that. And so, so that's essentially the piece here. And I want to say one final thing here, which is that cryptocurrency, we won't that much today be talking about the specific affordances that we were dealing with last time around permissionlessness or the unstoppable code or things like that. We'll mostly just be thinking about how these incentives, just money as a thing, how it drives behavior, and then specifically this financial stability piece here, because we'll do the consumer investor protection at a later class, and then the guarding against illicit activities we kind of touched on in last class. So, with that said, so let's talk about this incentives driving behavior. So let's do a dollar auction, I think.
All right. Let's get the money out.
Nice.
Okay, so we're actually doing this, just to let you know.
We're doing it. We're doing it.
I think Venmo, and we're auctioning off a $20 bill.
Oh,
Okay.
have we read the reading material or not?
I have a 5. Should we do a 5 instead?
Do you have a 10? Do you have 2 5s? What were you
no.
looking at here?
I have a 10. Okay,
Oh,
let's do a 10.
okay,
I
sweet.
was about to say I'm not a
She
big-
carries cash like a non-millennial or whatever. Okay, so this is Neha's money. I'll allow her to hold it.
You can run the auction though.
Yeah, okay, so the way that the auction is run.
Mine's $10.
Oh, look at that. It's real. We
Yeah.
know that. It says full faith and credit of the United
It's
States
got a
government.
lot of markings on it.
Yeah. And so the way the dollar auction works is, so we're gonna do, this is gonna be a top $2 auction, which means that anybody can start bidding $1 for this $10 bill, and then once someone might bid $1, and then let's say somebody else then bids $2. On top of that, the bids will go $1 each time. Once people start bidding, the top 2 bidders have to pay their amount. Okay, so it's not just like once you win, you have to pay your $9 to get the 10 or whatever. You have to, the top 2 bidders have to buy it.
And it's not anonymous, it's just like.
It's not anonymous.
Yeah,
We're just
right now,
we're just
yeah.
doing it right
And
now.
it goes to the top bidder.
Yeah,
So,
and you will pay Neha with Venmo, and
Yeah.
you will get the.
or I can
the-
make change or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
So does anybody want to start the bidding? $1 for this $10?
You do minus.
Oh, Hash is starting at
$1.
Hash is
So
starting.
there's 15 of us. Do we want to let one person buy it for $1 and split things evenly?
Oh, yes!
That is an outside of the game.
But
Yeah.
to be clear, you can do that. But then if you bid $2,
Yeah.
you could get it all for yourself.
So as far, you can try to make that coordination problem happen if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
And I definitely know that there is at least one bid for $1.
Yeah.
There is?
Yeah.
I don't agree to his proposal.
Oh, does not agree.
Okay, we got $1.
$2.
$2?
Oh, come on. Oh, no.
Okay, we got 3. Here we go.
Well,
Going once at $3.
First of all, participation's fun.
Oh, what does it go to? The profit?
The profit will go to a charity. Give directly. We're gonna give it to Give Directly. How about that? Yeah. Which is just. So it's $3.
Huh?
How will the profit?
$4?
You read the
$9?
materials?
Oh.
We have $9.
It's in the reading.
Straight to 9.
$9. We got $9 Hash.
No.
You realize you have to pay $4.
3.
Or 3,
Three.
sorry.
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
We were 3, no one said 4.
No one said 4.
He
It's
said
1,
9 though.
2,
He
3.
said 9.
Nine.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Going once at.
Can we trust that it really goes to charity? How can we
No.
trust that?
We'll try our best.
Is it tax deductible?
Yeah. No, for Neha, yes. Going twice at $9.
$10.
$10?
Oh, we got 10.
Here we go. Okay. 11.
Wait, now,
I'd rather lose $1 than $9. I'm the second bidder.
Yeah,
He
exactly.
offered 10, so I'd have to pay 9 for nothing. Rather pay 11 for something.
So we got $11 with 10 as the second highest going
Oh,
once.
the top 2 are sharing the $20, right?
No.
it's also $10, it's not $20.
Only the
Yeah.
top person.
It's
The-
$10.
It's only $10. The top bidder just gets the money, and then the
Oh,
top 2
yeah.
people have to pay
I know
Neha
that.
that amount of money.
Okay, yeah. That's right. We're demonstrating how it works.
Yeah, I don't know.
So going through. So it's $11 going once. going twice.
I'm gonna lose 9.
$12.
$12. Okay, $12 going once.
Well, can I go 50? 50,
We'll say the max is. Oh God. There is a max that I have in my mind, and once it hits that max, then it's done.
Yeah, but like
You have to at least.
oh,
now
we're straight to 50,
He
to
is
12.50.
It's increments.
Increments. You can increment
I
by
didn't realize that.
up to $5 if you would.
No,
like.
what's the minimum increment?
Oh, it's a minimum increment. Is $1.
Oh,
Oh.
okay, so what's the current offer?
I think 12.
So 13.
13. Going once. Going twice.
14.
14 going once.
15.
Going once. Going twice. Going 3 times.
16.
Going once. Going twice. Going 3
Yeah,
times.
17.
19.
19. Oh, 19. Up by 2. Going once. Going twice.
20.
Times.
Exactly. It's gonna go to 2,000.
Going once. 21. Okay. Going once. Going twice. Going 3 times. Sold.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, come
Sorry,
on.
he's gonna
You're,
Venmo us
you're the big
$20.
loser now.
They're gonna Venmo me about 20. He's gonna Venmo me $20.
Like just to be clear, this is very uncomfortable for me.
Very comfortable for me.
I think it was important to do this though, just to demonstrate. We've got a group of extremely intelligent people here, also good sports. Let's be clear, you're willing to participate, but you can see how these things can go. So, what's the result, Reese?
The result is $20, right? And 19, if I remember.
No, 21
Oh,
and 20.
21 and 20.
Okay, great.
So-
So we've got $41 for
I'm going to
charity.
share Lucas's cost. He's the big loser because he was the second.
He was the second, so
I'm
he's
winning 20 and I'm paying 21.
No.
You're
No,
winning
no,
10.
no, no.
You're winning 10.
Oh, so I'm losing 11.
You're losing 11.
But
He's
he's
losing
losing
20.
20.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pay you $4.50.
Okay, that's nice.
That's very
nice.
nice of you. Wow,
nice.
that's great.
So
Here,
he's-
just to be clear, yeah, here you go.
And it's Venmo. Can I
Venmo, cash,
can I Venmo you? Okay. Venmo you 21.
So he like lost.
Yeah. Okay.
Everyone lost it.
No.
Except for Nick.
Give directly. No, give directly.
Give
Charity. We're sending this to
And you
charity.
have
I
to-
lost $10, just to be clear.
No,
I'm
because
perfectly okay with
I'm
that.
going to Venmo you $21,
It's gonna
right?
go to charity. I'll Venmo $10 to charity. We'll do both. So anyway.
Well, I'm not going to take your $10 if I'm not
Okay,
going
fine.
to, if I
I'll
can't
take
Venmo
10.
you
I'll take
21.
10. I'll take 10.
You'll take
I'll get my
10?
$10 back. Yeah, sure.
Oh,
And
so
then
or
now
use
we've demonstrated the game, right?
Yeah,
That's the point.
No, keep this. You can Venmo me the right amount. I think it's important you keep the $10 bill. So we'll give the profit to charity. That's what we're gonna do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we have donated to charity.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
Good.
Yeah.
So the idea here is, and we can sync to make sure we deal with that correctly after class. But some of these times when these things happen, people have gone up to like $200. That was in the business school class, so that was not in this class.
$200 for $10.
$200 for $20 actually. So, but yeah, they were paying a lot, and it's because these incentives, they're crazy. They drive behavior, and especially when they are constructed in this negative way, which is like, hey, it made sense for both Lucas and Aaron at each point in time there to bid, because you were like, oh, of course I'm going to bid $1 for $10. And then once it gets higher and higher up, it's like, oh, he's winning now at, he's gonna pay $10 to get $10, so I'm just gonna lose $9. Instead, I could bid $11 and instead just lose only $1 instead of losing $9.
And unfortunately, Jason's proposal, though great, was not a Nash equilibrium either, and was more rational for someone to break out of the agreement and to start the bidding.
Yeah, exactly. So that is.
And it was in today's reading. You gotta refer to the reading.
Yeah, exactly. There's the so there's that FOMO. So that's this thing. FOMO 3D was in the reading, which is a fun name. The fear of missing out. That's the idea. And it's this Ethereum-based dollar auction, essentially, where you start with 1 ETH in the pot instead of $10 bill. You can pay 0.1 ETH to essentially get access to the pot, but only if you hold it for 24 hours. And then the 0.1 ETH also goes into the pot. And so for any rational actor who's here, you just keep on paying 0.1 ETH to get access to the increasingly large amounts of ETH in that pot. And this happened for a long time until there $12 million went into this pot. So a lot of money went in here, and then finally, eventually, the way that it was stopped, people were worried that it was just going to keep on going and essentially suck most of the Ethereum from the world into this smart contract. And a human eventually was able to understand how the bots worked that were doing the bidding, and then was able to force them to kind of misprice that commodity gas that they used in order to win the prize. So the bots thought they were doing stuff correctly and using the right gas price, but in fact he was able to trick them, and he or she or whatever was able to trick them and then win the prize. So this is an example of how some of these weird incentives drive behavior generally, and this is an example in the world here, programmable money, how you can kind of transfer something from the physical world or the traditional analog world into the digital world. We're going to talk about some of the positives and negatives of these incentives and how they drive behavior. But let's do the thing that we did last time, where in the goal here, it's kind of weird, but so last time we talked about, here you go, do you want to pass those along? Last time when we did this exercise, it was, hey, what are the positive and negative impacts of like cryptocurrency, or like the affordances, the technical affordances of the technology? You might need to, I need to buy more Post-it notes. Here's another one. Sorry, that didn't really work.
Not everyone get a pen?
Does everybody have a pen?
Everyone has a pen?
Raise your hand if you don't. You don't have a...
I have another pen, can I use it?
Yeah.
You can use that, that's not bad.
I'll show you guys.
So sometimes they ask you to use Sharpie sticker, so you can write limited number of words.
Nice.
With this I like 2 minutes.
And so what we're gonna do is, instead of, so the last time I was thinking about the affordances and how those lead to positive and negative outcomes. In this, we're just gonna think about, it's kind of a weird prompt, but how money as a thing, or money as an incentive, how that drives behavior. So thinking about money and some of the positive ways that, based off of having money as the technical affordance, what that does, and then the negative, the downsides of that as well. Does that make sense? So do that individually, and then we'll share with a group.
With respect to cryptocurrency or any money?
With respect to any money. So this is just money as a thing. How does that? What are the positive impacts on society as a result, and what are the negative impacts on society as a result? Kind of a weird prompt, but take like 3 minutes and start to brainstorm positive sides. We're going to do some sharing. I think that the way, so there's obviously, this is, as we were chatting about in the back, a very wide prompt. But it's interesting similar to the thinking of money as this core primitive and value exchange as a core primitive, I think it is helpful to think in this way for how these incentives drive behavior. So let's just do some, maybe let's have, sorry to do this, I should have told you this initially, but just one person from this group want to say like kind of the TLDR of some of the big positives and negatives?
Yeah, so I guess on the positives, we said that it completes sort of like the the pillars that you talked about with like store of value, like transaction, etc.
Yeah.
We also said that it can provide safety against like life shocks. So like if someone's really sick or something happens, like that's some way you can get out of it quickly. I think on the negatives, we said, well, obviously it's not equally distributed, so it causes inequality. Is controlled by like a central authority, like in terms of the liquidity. So like the central bank uses like quantitative easing and other mechanisms to control the flow. And then we talked about like it incentivizing greediness. Like there's probably a threshold in the middle when you have some money, but maybe not enough for what you want, versus being on one of the extreme ends as extremely rich or poor. But then someone actually brought that greed is good. So like we were actually like spent the last like minute debating like whether money is actually all inherently positive and the negatives are only by maintained on the side of like the human having negative qualities, and is that money's fault?
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, does someone in the back want to share what you guys chatted about?
I feel like we had different interpretations of the prompt. I was stuck on figuring out incentives, and was talking about the values of money.
Tell me more about the. Do you want to say more about your side of things?
I feel like you do better.
You should.
Incentives. I feel like negative incentive, showmanship. There's an incentive to show how much money you have, and I consider that a negative incentive because it can lead to waste. And a positive, or what we interpret as a positive social incentive, is there's a social value in charitable giving, so then people give to charity, like you are all just pressured to give
Yeah, so a negative to add is potentially the narrative issue of money becoming a proxy for value, when money is fungible, but value is context dependent, followed by the fact that in kind of a capitalist system with money as a proxy for value, this will now typically optimize money return rather than individual or social welfare, and has a centralizing positive feedback loop.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you. Just in the back.
Yeah, on the positive side, we mentioned fluid because they make market work. But we talked a lot about negative part, like inequality will increase because there's no limitation for someone entity to hold how much money. And by the greed, it will become more and more unequal. And also, the money is not capturing the social value in terms of, for example, global warming. It's not calculated capture or another negative part is in many societies, money becomes the face itself. So it's a very mono value system. So money is more important than anything else. Negative incentives.
Cool. Thank you. Someone from this group.
The other thing we had that wasn't said was like a way to I think it's a positive way to satisfy wants. You know, so you can buy housing or food or stuff like that.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. And then you guys.
Right. So I think we have different definitions of this prompt, but I think Dylan's definition is about the order. The incentive is about the coming up with some order for the society, for this post-industrialization world or era. And he was talking about one positive thing is to set up some homogeneous or some unified value of the money, so that we agreed on the value of this laptop or the phone is different. And then the other thing is about we as individuals we have different we prioritize our values based on what kind of goods that we need at this moment. So it's not just the monetary value of the goods, but also I value this phone more because it's like a old school or like a iPhone 11. I don't know what's 12 now.
Yeah.
and then another positive thing is the economy. What's the you wanna?
Sure. Yeah. Just that in having a incentive, you could kind of change behavior to be positive and negative. So say you add a tax on cigarettes. In say this kind of social public health view, we say smoking cigarettes is bad. But who decides that? Because maybe in a macroeconomic sense, having people die and take less of their pensions actually net positive. So you can encourage people to do or not do things, but then who is deciding that, and kind of what is the overall social good? It's the ultimate philosophical question. Yeah.
And my positive negative were based on the driving forces of human characteristics. So it could be the driving forces of making someone who's more ambitious and making be a hard worker because they have to get life necessities goods, and then the flip side, that's something that we all talked about, the greediness or the wants, what's when is enough,
Yeah.
right? And then also there's a third point that I didn't get to.
Oh, this was just a panic one at the end, but some monies have some use, literal use value. You have gold coins that you can make into a wire.
Mhm.
You have a cryptocurrency that's also software license. It's kind of more general.
Cool.
Yeah, commodity value.
Yeah, and then Lucas / Jack, do you guys want to say?
Yeah, we were talking more about sort of the money is great because it can sort of help you make decisions easier if everything can be priced, but also things that can't be priced make it so that, there can be positive or negative externalities that, can go awry when you sort of scale that up, and then you have sort of huge market imbalances.
Externalities. Good. Anything else to add, Jack?
It's possible my approach is a little too abstract, but I mentioned the word motivation, which could be positive or negative.
Say it again?
Motivation.
Motivation, yeah.
So on the positive side, it would push individuals to accomplish tasks that they otherwise wouldn't complete. So I look at my fellow undergrads getting their degrees, going for jobs. And then on the negative side of that, you would have false motivation, which would lead to self-destruction, and later on the time axis, where you would lose sight of the original objective because you see money as a means, but in that struggle you lose sight of what you were originally fighting for, and then it's more of a mindset limitation. So you have one objective function you're optimizing for, because everything's quantified now with money, right? So then you can see what would be the end results, and then again, if you think about time, future generations, this would reinforce, because you have again one value that you're prioritizing for.
Yeah, I think, and that oftentimes people will call that thing Goodhart's Law, where it is the thing that you're optimizing for, you metricize it, and then it just you start to game the system in order to just optimize for that one thing, and in fact you're losing a lot of the texture or your original goal or things like that. So I think a lot of these are very good. I think that the three, and I agree with a lot of them, the talking about greed is good. I think we don't need to watch this, but that was on the positive side. That was the video. There's this great video that Neha showed me yesterday actually about that's greed is good. And it's just a person giving a speech about why greed is awesome.
The movie Wall Street.
Yeah.
Wall Street, yeah. There's another, line here from Missy.
Is the name just Wall Street?
Yeah.
Yeah, the name is Just Wall Street. If you type in "Greed is Good" on YouTube, it's a pretty good clip. It's like a minute, but we don't have. We're zooming. So yeah, as everybody said, the greed side is very good. This idea that the idea behind capitalism of the system facilitates the conversion of selfish aims, or to be correct, not necessarily benevolent runs, at the individual level into beneficial results for the collective. That's kind of the macro idea here. We don't need to look too deeply into this, but there are some of these, this is this great 6 graphs where you just look at over the last 200 years, and obviously it's a very complex system where it's not like money started here and then all these graphs started to get better. It's also not like these are the only graphs that we should look at, and it's also the fact that there are lots of other parts of this, like the Industrial Revolution, other things, but a long time ago, lots of people were living in extreme poverty. Now, very few people are. Child mortality, half of kids used to die before the age of 5. Now it's less than 5%. So this, at least to some extent, is part of this market-based system that we have today, or at least, and who knows if you were to battle it versus the Marxist system, what these would have looked like, but it at least seems like that's the case. In cryptocurrency, you can see this as some of the positive aspects, and I know I didn't ask this specifically, but you can see, recently, so much money has gone into cryptography and distributed systems research, just because now you can, a lot of people that are interested in that stuff can make money with it, and you can make money if you do those things. And so as example, there's this thing called ZK Snarks, which we've talked about, this privacy technology, and just in the last 2 years, we've seen this ridiculous, these were all in the last, Plonk and Halo were in the last 2 weeks, saw all these really cool technologies that people are just a lot more researchers than there used to be on these things. And another piece, just as a positive side, is that the security of the network is derived from modeling these incentives, where you have, because Bitcoin miners want to turn their electricity into Bitcoin, and they want to, because of the way the incentive set works, that allows the kind of emergent property of that is that you get this extended chain where I'm not incentivized to make my own chain over here and spend a bunch of electricity to do that. No, instead I build off the main chain, and there's consensus around that. And that all happens because of these money as an incentive. I do want to, in this class in general, I guess, talk more about the negative side, because the positive side, companies and other people have that on lockdown generally. The big negatives that I want to emphasize here are that people do anything for money, which a lot of people kind of reference with the greed piece, and as we saw with the dollar auction. No offense, Arne and Lucas. They ignores externalities piece, which we chatted about, and an externality is kind of an impact outside of the system. So the easiest one is climate change, where you have people just living. I just take plane flights all around, and it doesn't impact me in my small little bubble. But then if you have a bunch of people doing that, then you get something like climate change. So it's external. It's not priced into my plane flight or whatever. And then this other note that Jason said was that these reinforcing feedback loops consolidate power. So these kind of underlying feedback loops where if you've got money, you can make more money. But if you don't have very much money, it's hard to make money. And so that is an issue. So I think, most of the people who do anything for money piece, mainly you can think of this as, we're going to talk about this a lot in the consumer protection piece during class 10. Everything's a scam, a fraud. People are doing anything for money, and it is really intense. I'll just play one quick 30-second clip of this video. This is a person that was selling this thing called BitConnect, and this is kind of a funny video, but it's actually really sad because a lot of people lost a lot of money. This was essentially a big Ponzi scheme where people bought into this. Yeah, it's intense. People bought into this thing and were promised to get more money, and this is at one of their events where they're selling it. So he's selling it, and later here he says, yeah. 137 days ago, 25K, now 140K. Seems like you should get into this BitConnect. So this is just one example, though, of many of these. This was one of the bigger ones, but just one example of people. Once you have people into money, and all these, this was one that came out recently. All this exchange volume, all these exchanges, 95% of it was faked. It was people doing wash trades where they just kind of trade back and forth and a variety of things. And
we just glare at this.
This was okay.
This was okay.
Actually, we are one of rare that we don't have that.
Yeah, there were only 10, and you were one of 10.
I think it's less than 10.
Yeah, exactly. So and the other funny piece here is that people doing anything for money, it's not even of the non-fake volume, of the real volume. A lot of these things are scams and frauds or whatever. And of the ones even that aren't scams and frauds, it's pretty much all used for speculation and gambling. So that's an issue. The externality piece, as you all read with the climate change thing, it's this weird thing right now. You have the white paper that was released 10 years ago. It says you can turn electricity into Bitcoin. And then now, 10 years later, about 1/500th of global electricity, the Bitcoin network uses about 1/500th of global electricity consumption and about 1/2000th of global CO2 emissions. And so that is, and there's many debates about good and bad here. If you want to, there's a video that I linked to in the syllabus where you can click on the climate change thing that links to the crypto ethics, back when it was called crypto ethics, that reading list, and there's a video there that has people debating this. But the bottom line is that this is not really baked into the cost. It's just people will do what they want to do, and then and it's the same with all kind of electricity-based things these days, is that they're not, the climate change externality is not baked into the cost, it is ignored. We do not have a carbon tax, we do not have any of those things. And so, these externalities are difficult. I think that the other piece here is the reinforcing feedback loops. And as we noted, I think we'll dive into this more with the class number 7, wealth inequality. But you look, there's the quantifying decentralization piece from the reading about how decentralized are these systems, and in general, not that decentralized, and depending on what you're counting. And this is a graph of Bitcoin owner decentralization, where this would be a perfect curve of everybody having the same amount of money essentially, and this is one where a small amount of Bitcoin addresses have a lot of money. And we'll talk more about this and how the best ways to measure that, given that you can have like really, really small amounts of Bitcoin that you could like you could call dust, you could put that on a bunch of different addresses. The fact that exchanges have just one big wallet, so we shouldn't necessarily count those here, but even given all that nuance, the Gini coefficient of these systems is bad because if you have money, you make money. If you don't have money, you don't make money. Yeah, some of these other ones that you all noted are pretty good. That doesn't capture all value. There are coordination problems. It's all predicated on this aspect of growth. So that is this kind of macro level of incentives as the fact, one thing to take away from the cryptocurrency world, and the fact that it really is, if you think about other kinds of tech ethics, something like AI ethics does have some of these top level incentives to drive behavior, but they're kind of one step removed with something like AI, where it's like, oh, you know, you can use AI to make money in this certain way, and therefore more money will be put into AI research and things like that to eventually make money, versus just like it being hooked into the system itself and kind of closer to the rails in terms of these incentives driving behavior. So with that, does anybody have any, before we go to the second level here of like traditional financial regulation, does anybody have any comments or questions on the incentives driving behavior piece? Cool. We have about 20 minutes left in class, and so what we're going to do is chat about these public policy objectives of financial regulation. I forgot to copy paste those other ones here, but the one that we're going to concentrate on today is this financial stability one, because the consumer protection piece is much more connected to securities law and investor and consumer protection. And so for financial stability, the idea here is it's a macro desire, where if you think money is a good thing, you want that money you want people to kind of trust it, and for that system, that macro system, to not like fail. So this is the Great Depression. This is in the Weimar Republic, when money was so worthless that people were burning it because it was better for people to burn it than to use it to buy things that you could, like wood or whatever, to burn. Or in the Bitcoin blockchain, the first thing, chains are on the brink of second bailout for banks, the Great Recession recently. So that's what happens when you don't have financial stability, and that's what you're trying to stop. So financial stability is, there's a couple different subcomponents of it. And we were chatting with one of the DCI advisors, Gary Gensler, who was the ex-chairman of the CFTC, about some of these things. And one way to think about it is, in general, you can have this loss of market confidence, where some bad things start to happen in the market, you lose confidence, and then you could have like a crisis in Bitcoin or Ethereum or things like that, and then that system, that kind of subsystem of cryptocurrency, could start to crash. And there are a bunch of different ways that could happen that we'll chat about. What's up?
Can you talk a little bit more about the 51% attacks? I've heard this from different angles, and I'm just wondering, can we just like talk about like how that would happen?
Yeah. So the way that a 51% attack happens is the idea is that you have a bunch of right now you have a bunch of Bitcoin miners that are mining blocks, and none of them have more than 51% of all of the hash rate or all of the electricity that's running to power to mine these blocks. And essentially, it's however much hash rate they have, that gives them that percentage of the block. So if I have 10% of the hash rate, I get 1 out of every 10 blocks. And when I get that block, I create all the transactions that people have sent me, and then I get to propose that next block, and I get a little bit of Bitcoin in response for doing that. If, however, I buy a bunch of miners and a bunch of equipment and do this whole thing and get more than 51% of the whole network hash rate, then what would happen is I can essentially, you can, and actually it might be better for Neha to explain this because she knows a lot more, but the macro idea is that I could, there's a couple different attacks that I could run. The one attack that I could run is I could allow everybody else to continue mining over here. They think that they're doing a great job. I just like hold my 51% over here, and I start to I spend money over here, like spend my Bitcoin for things and get it, buy US dollars or other things over here, and then eventually I show everybody, ooh, I've actually been mining on the Bitcoin blockchain this entire time. And so I have all these blocks that you were doing over here, there's actually a heavier chain over here with a lot more blocks because I actually have more power than all of you. And all this stuff that I got over here where I traded my Bitcoin for US dollars or for Lamborghinis or whatever, now I essentially get all that Bitcoin back. I rewrite history and I get it all over here. Did that make sense as an attack? Neha, do you want to say anything else?
Yeah, I mean, just in general, miners can do all sorts of crazy things. They could mine empty blocks. They could withhold blocks. They can sort of screw up with the pace of the system. But that's the classic attack.
And it's very hard to get 51% of the network for a wide variety of reasons, but people could do it, especially larger kind of nation state actors. So you can imagine if there was a 51% attack, if that happened, where you had everybody doing all these transactions over here, and then everything was rewritten for the past longish period of time, even if it's a week or whatever, you can imagine a big loss of market confidence and then a crisis in these cryptocurrencies. There's another kind of financial stability piece, which is connected more to things like Libra, where with something like Libra, which is the Facebook cryptocurrency, they create their Libra token. In order to create their Libra token, it's backed, it's collateralized by a bunch of other nation state currencies. So some US dollars, some Chinese yuan, some euros, some whatever. And that basket makes it so that money goes in, and when money goes into the basket, they get to print these new Libra coins. And when they do that, that could have a big impact on it's very connected to the existing financial system, kind of unlike some of these attacks here, just like, oh, if this all goes down, it's just like Bitcoin goes down. But with something like Libra, you can imagine, so one way to think about it is Libra has a bunch of, if people in developing countries get excited by Libra and start to use it, then their central banks don't have as much control over their monetary policy, how much money they print, things like that. And instead, Facebook has all of that power, which then could lead to some kinds of crises in fiat in that country where they're like, oh God, we don't actually want to use this thing, or our monetary policy is messed up and it's not actually changing things. So those are some of the pieces where the financial stability piece is not as much linked to the specific cryptocurrencies, but it's more connected to the fiat side of things. So with that, what I want to do is, there's a couple different examples here, but I want to spend most of the time today chatting about the financial stability, especially as connected to the code and the Bitcoin protocol or some of these protocols, the code itself, and how that code has risk in it and how that can be bad. And so to do that, I essentially want to, so Neha was her and the team at DCI, back before I joined the DCI, they found these bugs in IOTA and Bitcoin Cash. And so what I want to do is just essentially for me and then for us to ask Neha some questions about what that was like and to understand how it connects back to financial stability and those kind of things. So with that, I'm just going to zoom to here. So I guess Neha, to start, could you tell us there are two different vulnerabilities here. What happened with IOTA? What did you all find and what did you all do?
Sure. So I think it's important to note these systems are software. Software has bugs. All software has bugs. And these systems in particular are dealing with millions, if not billions of dollars, which is, you know, kind of scary. And there's no safety net. There's no undo. There's no reset password. At least there shouldn't be. Sometimes there is unintentionally, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So, you know, the security of the software, the security of the system is paramount. And I think what we saw, and I think what we still continue to see, is a lot of teams that are kind of trying to write code in the move fast and break things paradigm of the web and web apps and mobile apps and things like that. And I'm afraid that just doesn't work in this context. So you might see teams that are releasing software, releasing networks, that they want to have it both ways. On the one hand, oh, this token's great and it's going to be worth a lot, so you should absolutely buy it and it should be worth, you know, $1 billion. But on the other hand, this is just the beginning. This is a test. You know, you're experimenting. Be prepared to lose it all, right? So they kind of operate in these two paradigms simultaneously in parallel whenever it's convenient. So there was one of these projects, IOTA, which was on a big marketing push. And then one of my colleagues at the DCI, you know, was like, "Oh, this is ridiculous." And I said, "Well, tell me why it's ridiculous. Like, go actually look and see and tell me something." So he started looking at it, and he noticed that a pretty like core primitive, a hash function, which we learned about a few classes ago, IOTA had written their own version of it. Now, in cryptography, it's generally not a great idea to write your own cryptography code unless you are an expert. So there are a lot of libraries out there. There's a lot of time, especially with hash functions, a lot of time goes into vetting them, trying to break them. There are a lot of contests. You know, it can take years to get what we believe to be a solid hash function. A lot of time, and experts take a look at it. And they had just sort of casually written their own. Now, the problem was that the security of their network relied on certain properties of this hash function being true, which weren't necessarily true to the degree that they thought it was. And so it was possible to do something which is causing a collision in the hash function with, this is something that you're not supposed to be able to do in any reasonable amount of time or with reasonable computing power, or at least not for a long time. Hash functions do get broken eventually. SHA-1, for example, was broken by Google. And you know, but by the time that happens, everyone's sort of supposed to, there's sort of a sequence of steps that happen when a hash function starts to get broken. And the first few steps are, you know, not really going to affect people, but they indicate, hey, we should all move away from this hash function. It's time to upgrade. So this didn't have that. It just was like, there's a hash function, it's broken. So we wrote about it, and we tried to interact with them and do a vulnerability disclosure with them. And I actually am not super familiar with the security world, so this was the first time I'd ever done one of these, but my colleague was and had done this before. And it didn't really go very well, and they were kind of mad at us, and they were very worried about anything we might say publicly, because of course it could affect the price of their token. So you know, we went through some disruption there. And of course, we also got this massive response on Twitter, which was really surprising, from people who really believed in the token and were angry with us for what we were doing, and people tried to dig up conflicts of interest and things like that, and sort of string things together that I don't think had any merit. But it was, you know, it was really eye-opening to see that happening, and I don't think it happens quite like that in every other industry. In cryptocurrency, all this stuff is really brought to the fore. Another situation is with Bitcoin Cash. So IOTA at the time was worth, I think, about $1 billion market cap. These numbers are very, you know, they're not totally accurate. Okay, so if I sell you a NEHA token for $1 and I happen to have printed 1 billion of them, I now have a $1 billion market cap. That's you know, it's a little silly. But IOTA was traded on an exchange, and you know, it had a value and a supposedly $1 billion market cap at the time. Bitcoin Cash, I think, had a tens of $1 billion market cap at the time. And one of the engineers who works at the DCI, Corey Fields, I don't know why, but he liked to look at code changes in Bitcoin Cash just to see what they were up to. And he noticed that they made a change which immediately raised a sensor as, hey, wait, this is dangerous. You know, this very small number of code line change, this is a little bit dangerous. And the reason it was dangerous is because he thought it could cause what's called a fork, a permanent chain fork. So, you know, the nodes in the network, if you go back to class 1, are running this software, and it's very important that all the nodes agree on what the rules of the system are. Because if different nodes disagree with each other, then they might not find each other's blockchain valid. And so you might end up, the blockchain might fork. You might end up with two different versions of history. And as we just talked about a 51% attack, when there's two different versions of history, things are a bit chaotic, and it's possible to double spend people. It's possible to do lots of things. And and Corey writes about this in his post, and you should absolutely read it. Another thing you can do is trade on the market. If you anticipate releasing this and the price going down, then you can take out a large short. I really urge you to read his post about what he went through and what he was thinking as he did this, and just how easy it would have been for him to do that. How easy it would have been for him to create a transaction, release it into the wild that would cause a hard fork in Bitcoin Cash, this tens of billions of dollar currency, and to make money off of that. So he writes about that, and I think what this experience really taught us was that there are nowhere near enough eyes really looking on this code and really taking this seriously. The problem with security, I find, is that people don't necessarily take it seriously until it breaks, until there's until your target and millions of your customers' credit card numbers get stolen. And even then you try to clean it up, and then maybe you don't worry about it for a while. So with these cryptocurrencies, other than the top maybe 2 or 3, I worry greatly about the software that is behind them. And I think if we're thinking about building a new financial system, the code is nowhere near ready. And as you are sort of going forth in this area and exploring different projects and tokens and things like that, I just want to make sure that you have the knowledge to question, bring in experts when necessary. I'm not a security expert in a lot of different areas. On the IOTA thing, I worked with someone else who knew a lot about hash functions. We worked together. So, talk to experts when necessary and listen to them, because there's a lot of really bad code out there. So,
Yeah.
Also, when we talk about hard forks, is it always that someone disagrees with there are two different versions of history? Is that the only case in which forks have come out?
Yeah, I'd say that's kind of pretty much the definition of a hard fork. We didn't really talk about hard forks and soft forks, but maybe when we get to the governance section, we can spend a bit of time talking about that, because I think that's where that'll really come into play.
And there's a difference in between the soft and the hard.
Yeah.
Is it possible to talk about forgery of paper money and these issues, and the monopoly of printing money? Can you talk about those issues and draw parallels?
Interesting question. I have not drawn parallels before with these issues. I guess I think of it more as an irresponsible monetary policy by a central bank or something like that. Like the infrastructure. Like when we talk specifically about the security of the software that these systems are based on, the parallel that I draw is with the infrastructure of the payment system or the central bank issuance system, or ATMs or something like that. I guess I haven't really thought about it with respect to.
I would add one thing, which is forgery. I mean, in the traditional world, it's like, okay, you're trying to forge you're trying to make some fake dollars, and you have to do a bunch of weird things in order to do that in the physical world. In the digital world, the way that you do it is by finding some weird exploits in the code that might allow you to print money that should not be printed. And so that is a thing that can happen in that world.
And get away with it.
So it's similar really in some ways, right? And then the technology arms race with paper money is then you build in features, let me just show one of them, right?
Yeah. I mean, one big difference I think is that to do it in the way that we're describing, which is to create two different versions of history, that's usually a very public thing. It's hard to do that in secret. Like it's hard to hide the fact that you're doing it. It's also hard to do anything about it, but it's hard to hide the fact that you're doing it.
It's also hard to hide a money printing factory.
I've never tried.
Speaks from experience.
That's definitely.
Any other thoughts or quick questions for Nick?
On the Bitcoin Cash security disclosure, and Corey in his article talks a little bit about worrying for his own safety and how he disclosed it. I was just wondering, had he done the attack instead of going through the disclosure he did, beyond sort of physical safety or reputation, would there have been any legal ramifications, do you think? Like, is there a securities court that would say, oh no, like, you can't do that, or is it just...
Great question. And I think there have been double spends in the wild. We have seen them with some smaller cryptocurrencies. I do not think that to date there's been any legal action based on those double spends, in part because the characters who have done them have done a pretty good job hiding themselves. So first of all, he would have had to get caught, right? Second of all, I think that our regulation, first of all, financial regulation, the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, they are written in such a way that I think it gives courts and judges a lot of leeway in terms of sort of trying to decide. They're not letter of the, like, it's not like you sent this packet to this, that means that you did this bad thing. It really gives courts and lawyers a lot of wiggle room in terms of, and they really have a chance to look at intent. And I think it's pretty clear in that situation there's an intent to manipulate the market and steal money. So I don't know that there's a specific law against it, but it seems like I think you would probably go to jail if you could show that you'd have to, the exchange or whoever you ripped off would have to come after you and things like that. Have you guys ever been double spent or?
No, double spent no, but we have been hacked.
You've been hacked.
$5 million of Bitcoin was stolen in end of 2014. Never found who did it. We are tracking it still, and the FBI is on it. There's actually an
who's
article.
on the FBI?
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's 5 years
so
ago.
the law enforcement is working on these cases. It's not that they would be ignoring it. As you said, you can always find a parallel from a traditional world. Like you steal, someone steals Bitcoin is like stealing money. It's no difference. Like, people were damaged. That's the bottom line. And if you can find some analogy, you can get. You will get prosecuted, of course, if you find whoever was behind it.
And that was $5 million in 2014. So that I don't even know what that's worth right now. You don't want to think about it.
A lot more.
Yes, let's do one more question. Yeah.
Yeah, just coming back to Corey's part in his article about how he feared for his life, and your point about how he could have shorted Bitcoin Cash. I feel like that made it relate to the article that was about the Gini coefficient, because it was noted that Vitalik, I can never pronounce his name, but the Ethereum guy, someone could like kick him out, right, and like bring down Ethereum. He is like this security concern for Ethereum. For example, someone could short Ethereum and then assassinate him, and they would make a lot of money. Or if they had invested in these other security or other like cryptocurrencies that might go up in value. Do people that is that a security issue? Like, does he have a security entourage that follows him around? No.
He's trying to distance himself from the development of Ethereum, so because he realizes that he's like a centralizing figure in Ethereum, so he's trying to like put some distance between him and Ethereum development, but obviously it's still.
Yeah, I think so. He's trying to do that, but even for folks that are on either the Bitcoin side or the Ethereum side, any sides, I mean, it is to some extent. I think there aren't that many. There have been people that have been like kidnapped and stuff, and have been extorted for when people have known to have high amounts of Bitcoin. They have been like that has happened to them, or like the people who hacked me or whatever, and then found out that I had no money. I do think it definitely is long term a issue. We don't really see it yet, neither in the Bitcoin community nor in the Ethereum community.
Well,
though
I will say the Bitcoin developers I know are incredibly paranoid.
Yeah.
So they're won't find their address online. They won't
don't
allow
have phones.
pictures or some of them are, and also they don't advertise where they're going or where they're going to be, and also they don't try to become this central figure, this celebrity. A lot of them try to stay back from the news. I do recall, Jihan Wu, who was the CEO of Bitmain, which was the largest sort of mining company for a while, did have security. He went everywhere with security. So.
Yeah, so definitely a security risk. And I guess the conclusion, I mean, as we noted from Neha's story, there's both all the craziness of like the money makes people crazy piece is a part of it. And like if you look on the IOTA stuff and like how intense all the IOTA Twitter mobs were, and like they super like because they were threatened in this kind of deep way by it. And then on the Bitcoin Cash side, it's more connected. So both of them are connected to consumer protection in the sense of like money just like going away, or money, the market cap of something going down a ton. And then depending, these things might be connected to the more macro kind of financial stability, systemic risk side, where something like Bitcoin Cash, if it had done this hard fork, and then maybe Bitcoin Cash's thing goes down a lot, who knows how that connects to the other people in the crypto ecosystem. So yeah, with that said, let me, I think we're in wrap mode, unfortunately, but we can have questions after class. I'll send along some of these. There are other examples of some of these things, but I think we hit, this is the key one that we hit on. We talked about the Libra one, and there are some other kinds of risks that these things have that then can lead to a loss of market confidence and to like more macro crises and financial stability. So with that, I want to, I guess, remind folks that, so these are the key learnings from today. Thinking of cryptocurrencies as this weird experimental land in the history of money, money driving behavior generally, and the negative impacts of externalities and reinforcing feedback loops. And then finally, this thinking about the traditional financial system that doesn't really think about the externalities and doesn't think about reinforcing feedback loops, but does think about macro things like financial stability and how that can be affected by some of these code-based issues with money. So that was today.